everybody, welcome to another episode of the Fraud Boxer podcast. It's been a brief moment while I was getting some conferences out of the way, but I'm back today, and it's a special guest I have today. Today, I'm joined by Shawn Kelley from Seat Geek. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
God, your audio sounds great. I really am going to enjoy having somebody that has another pro audio setup on here. It's going to be crystal clear. The listeners are going to love it. So welcome to my podcast. You and I have known each other for a little while. We actually met, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, during COVID was when we really started talking on a regular basis for a little while there. I know we met before, we talked before, but during COVID, we had a ticketing group that would meet and talk about what was happening in the ticketing industry. And you guys have had a call with your company with like some of the other ticketing merchants for a while. I joined that when I was at Ticketmaster, but we really got a good cadence going for a while there during COVID while we shared what was happening to our industry. The ticketing industry is fairly unique in how the card brands approach, because there is a lot of lead time. So it's different than selling just individual goods. We have event times that are usually 6 months, a year out. So it's a little different. So yeah, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Beautiful Northwest day. I'm just outside of Portland, Oregon.
So, that's right. I grew up in Salem, so I'm familiar. Is it raining today?
It is not. We're not yet in the rainy season, so we're taking this late summer, early fall.
The falls in the Northwest were always so great, especially during harvest, which you could just get that smell in the air. It wasn't too hot. Bugs were a little shitty, but
yeah. So far we're good this year.
That's great. Yeah, I do miss it up there, but I don't miss the rain. So I'm happy to hear. I spent some time up there this summer, and it was like 105 degrees, so that was a little aggressive.
Yeah, we had a week or so that was pretty rough this year.
Yeah, and it just happened to be the 1 week I was up there. Yeah,
so you can stay in LA and keep the warmth away.
I'm going to keep my smog and my humidity and just my overall assholeness, but I fit in really well here. I think everybody agrees. Yeah. So let's talk about your history a little bit, and then we'll get into some of the meat and bones of this one, which I think is going to be more around your guys' approach and your specific approach to a couple of specific problems. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think we'll start with how you got into fraud, because none of us really planned to get into fraud. And you have a pretty interesting background. You've done quite a few different things that were definitely not fraud related and kind of far from fraud. So yeah, you want to run us through a little bit of what's going on with your past?
Yeah, totally. Degree was in communications. I worked in the nonprofit sector for a little while, worked in kind of some early tech, did a lot of front-end web development, took a break from tech for a while and renovated old houses, had a whole crew of 8 people working for me.
Like house flipping? Like HGTV style?
Yeah, but focusing on other clients. Sometimes it was whole house projects, sometimes it was smaller. And primarily 50-plus-year-old homes.
Oh, wow.
So kind of niched down into that.
Did you have to work with the city and historical regulations on those things? Is 50 years old?
Sometimes, depending where they were. A lot of, only once or twice did we, I would say. Most of the time it was outside of city regulations, city, constraints.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, everything from some really cool mid-century modern homes.
I love those.
All the way back to 100, 150-year-old homes. So did that for a while and kind of missed tech during that time. Doing kind of manual labor wipes you out, and you don't really want to do much online after that. And so I missed a lot online those few years. So I was excited to get back. I started an event space in a 150-year-old brewery. That turned into a huge, really popular wedding venue in the Midwest. And did that for a couple of years, and then ended up out in the Northwest. And I'd known about Seat Geek for a long time. One of my good friends that I used to share an office with was one of the first engineers at Seat Geek, and he would always try and get me to apply and come work for them, but I didn't ever have a desire to move to New York. And then at one point when I was out here in Portland, found a job posting for Seat Geek in Portland, and ended up being hired as their first Portland employee.
Interesting. So why were they choosing Portland if they're New York based? Was there a specific reason?
There was this movement. So this was I've been there 7 years this week, actually.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And there was this movement right around that time. I think a lot of it kind of put to the forefront by Simple Bank. I don't know if you knew of them, but it was one of the early neobanks.
Yeah, actually, I do. Yeah.
And they had some pretty interesting approaches that kind of put them on the map. But one of their things was who knows to what extent it was true and what extent it made a good story, but they supposedly did a test to be able to find where the happiest sounding people were in the country. And that's where they wanted to put their customer support center. So when you called in, you were talking to the happiest people. And so out of this study that they did, Portland is where they found and where they put their headquarters. So Airbnb ended up following suit and putting a customer support center out here, and a number of other kind of tech companies did. And so our customer support head at the time, his name was Ross, he ended up following suit and doing the same. And so that was kind of the impetus behind why we went from New York to also having a location in Portland.
That's super interesting. So just a quick thing, I'm just going to talk about it on another episode another day, but I actually, that's how I got into fraud, was partially due to the call center environment in Portland. So I was in Portland after the economy died in 2008, and I needed health insurance. So I was taking call center work. So like there was a T-Mobile call center down in Salem, and then there was a Apple outsourced call center that was through Xerox ACS up in Tigard, right there off the 217 I-5. Sorry, I could say I-5 or 5 because I'm used to saying "duh" in front of all my freeways from LA. But also at the Netflix contact center they used to have over in Hillsborough. So that's where I really was got my start into fraud at the time with some card testing stuff. And I'll talk about that on another episode another day. But that I just think it's funny because I remember I was like, why are there so many call centers? And I remember people would say that the dialect, there was no notable people from the South, people from New York, like they have that tone and like that inflection, and people in Portland, they don't. So
it's very ambiguous.
It's just pretty gray ass English, you know?
Yep.
So that's really funny that you guys even noticed that. So you were the first one out there, and then you guys have an office there now too?
We do.
And how many?
Pre-COVID, there were about 75 people in our Portland office. Pretty good size. Now I think we have about that many in Portland, but only maybe 20 or so that come into the office. And so we have a new office, a different office than we did prior to COVID.
Okay.
A great space downtown.
So is your whole team in Portland area?
No, we're about 70% Portland, 30% outside of Portland.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. I always like to figure out what people are doing now, like post-COVID, because everybody moved around a lot. I mean, I obviously switched jobs in the middle of COVID, and I have a company, and it was really interesting for me to onboard with a company that I've never met anybody at. I mean, I go into my office every once in a while. I'm fortunate that we have a building down here, but it's weird to see like how companies spread out and where their people are and how they're managing their teams in this new world.
Yeah, but, it's been super interesting. Our team largely has been hired in the last year because of kind of coming back out of COVID. The two biggest teams hit with layoffs, unfortunately, were customer support and fraud teams, because you don't have in the events.
No sales.
Anyway,
Yeah.
there's no sales happening. There were no events happening. And so there wasn't a lot of direct support needed. Obviously some, supporting refunds and postponements and all of that.
Very aware of those.
But yeah, on the fraud risk side, there wasn't much happening. So our team got pretty small and lean during that time. Coming out of it, it's interesting. We weren't a remote company prior, as many companies were not. And now we have a pretty cool approach where you can choose to be an office person, a remote person, or a flex, where you can kind of take.
It's pretty cool.
Like worlds.
It's really interesting because I mean, I've had large teams before, and then I had large teams in COVID. I still have a fairly okay sized team right now. Obviously, there was been some things that have affected the size of my team at this company. But when I was at Ticketmaster, I had a pretty large team, and we went all remote, like we all had to do in the world. And there are some people that I think the vast majority of the people wanted that. They like that. Especially I had some folks that live far away, and LA can be hard to get around. But there are people that don't like that. They crave the social interaction. And it was really difficult for me because they would be like, can we go to the office? And I'm like, well, you can, but there's not going to be anybody there, you know? And then like
Right,
for the first time, like they couldn't, because then you had to go if you're vaccinated, then you had to figure out how they were going to prove that. And then it was this whole thing, you know, but there are people that like do like to go in. Like I admit that if I didn't have to commute, I would go in. But it's the commute on either side, especially for me in Los Angeles, where I'm in Orange County now, where I got to go into the office tomorrow and on this coming Thursday. We're recording this on a Tuesday, everybody. There goes the magic right there. But
pseudo live,
right? I know. See, we're close. But it's going to take me an hour each way to get there, and it's just why, you know? But at the same time, I have to be respectful and understand that some people aren't. And then, you know, we have the challenges too. We could talk about whole management and in COVID and a whole different, probably go on for hours on that. But like people that tend to have a lot of hardware malfunctions as excuses, you just have to eventually say, hey, you know, I'm gonna have you go into the office so we can make sure where you have IT resources nearby. It's been a wild ride, you know, but I think it's really interesting that you guys give the people the choice. And I think that I might actually start incorporating that into some of the offers that I do here, if my company will allow me. Because I know we have desk space, you know, clearly we have a 10-year lease on a brand spanking new building. So I'm very sure they'd like to use it. But let's talk about Seat Geek, specifically for those that don't know. Obviously, it's a ticketing company. Can you talk about it in your own words? And then I will probably add some stuff on the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give a couple of kind of waypoints that will add some context and make sense. We started out as a ticket search engine, right? And so you would search for tickets to a live event, and then we would pass you off to StubHub or any of the number of smaller ticket sites way back in the day. And the transaction then would happen there. And so we just made our way on affiliate sales originally.
I think that I used you guys like probably 7-8 years ago. It was like you guys have pictures of what it was like to sit in the seat.
Yep.
And that was what I remember. You guys were the first ones to do that. And it was super useful for me when I was buying it like at arenas that I'd never been to. So I distinctly remember that piece. But I think you guys did pass me on to Vivid, I think, or something at the time. Was that a thing?
I don't remember all of the partners. It was a lot of them. But yeah, we weren't merchant of record for any transactions. We were just making money off of affiliate sales. Our view from Seat was one of the things that kind of put us on the map. And then the other big one that a lot of people know is Deal Score. And so it's not just sorting by the cheapest seats or, you know, the quote unquote best, you know, closest to the ice seats, but taking a whole lot of different factors into consideration. The best seats at a hockey event might not be the best seats at a football game. Well, they aren't the same. And so layering in all of that. And so that was kind of the original background. And then around exactly 7 years ago, we launched our consumer marketplace. So C2C, consumers could sell tickets. And that's what really then put us head to head with StubHub. Still just playing in that secondary space. And then around 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now, was when we started into primary ticketing.
Yeah, you did.
Our first North American team was Sporting Kansas City. And that was kind of done as a pilot to see how it went, working with a separate company that provided the box office software. And that went so well that we ended up acquiring that company. They were called Top Ticks, and incorporated their software into ours. And then that's what let us move forward into being a primary ticketing provider. And now, we have 3 NFL teams this year. The Dallas Cowboys were our first NFL team, the New Orleans Saints, the Arizona Cardinals. We recently announced Washington Commanders next season will be with us. So a number of NBA teams, a number of MLS teams. So in those cases, besides, our secondary marketplace, which still is continuing today, we also are competing now head to head with TM and with Axis, are the kind of main players in the States.
And
overseas, I was just going to say, we ticket half of the English Premier League in the UK, which is pretty cool. So
you guys are really growing this primary business. So just so for the listeners that don't understand, there are what we're talking about here. There are 2 different types of ticketing. So there is a primary ticketing system, which is the company that makes the ticket. So usually arenas sign an exclusive deal with a ticketing provider like Access, Ticketmaster, or SeatGeek. And that is the only company that actually creates the ticket. So if you're buying from them, buying a primary ticket, you're the first person to hold that ticket. It is yours. Nobody else could have that ticket. And then there's the secondary markets, which are your StubHubs, your Vivid Seats. Ticketmaster has one, and you guys have one as well, that you, as the person that bought or hold that primary ticket, can resell it. Now, that means the person that's buying it from you on that secondary market, they are not buying a direct first-hand inventory. They're buying what's called resold inventory. Now, that's the two pieces there. Now, there are, when you get into the secondary market, there are people that are on the other side of that. So me selling a ticket would expect to be some sort of payout at the end after my tickets are sold. So there's some risk that can happen there. And then the people that are buying the ticket, they want to make sure that they're getting a legitimate ticket, not something that's been sold like 15, 16 different times. So there's a lot of stuff that companies like you guys do, like StubHub does, like even Ticketmaster does, to make sure that those tickets are the real actual thing. But having the luxury of being a primary and a secondary, and being able to rebarcode things if you need to back a sale, so that way you don't, like, it's not a PDF that like 5 people can see. It can only ever be seen once. There are some very useful upsides. Now the problem is to enter the primary ticketing market, it's hard because a lot of arenas have very long-term deals with clients that they've worked with for decades. So in order to be able to get one away from somebody that they've worked with for decades is a pretty big deal. And if you have somebody like the Dallas Cowboys on your roster, that's not something to be overlooked. Like that's a marquee client with a owner that is notorious for being really into how his fans' experience is. So congratulations on that.
Yeah. That was a pretty exciting moment for sure.
Yeah. So now that you are in both the primary and the resale side, that has brought up a whole lot of things that can happen on the risk side of the business. So you now have to doing regular purchase fraud, I think, is something that we all know. It changes every day. There's a lot of things that can happen. Payouts brings a whole different element in there. There's a lot of AML compliance that has to be brought in. So that's a whole different thing. So what have you done? Obviously, you probably can't say tool names. I think that's something that we never can do, depending on if you or actually have case studies or whatnot out there in the world. But what have you done? What's changed? Like, just tell me all about your fraud setup and tell me about some of the challenges. And I'm probably going to jump in and ask questions because we kind of time this so that we could be more like a conversation anyways for the audience. So I'm not going to know all that he's going to say. I might know a little bit, but we'll keep it fresh here.
Yeah. Sounds good. So one of the really interesting things for us, like I mentioned during COVID, our team got really small and really lean, and not having a lot to do fraud wise caused us to kind of take a step back and evaluate how we've been doing things and see, is there anything that we can change? There were a few constraints along with that. One, we knew that at some point events are going to come back. We don't know when that's going to be. We don't know if that's going to be like a slow trickle back up, or if it was going to come back the way that they kind of shut down that March 16th or whatever that day was in 2020. And so having to be prepared for that without having a team that knows your systems, that knows how things work, made for a pretty interesting set of constraints to look at, and how do we address that? Beforehand, I'll try and walk a little carefully to not give away all of the secrets. But beforehand, we were very manual review heavy, as most of the ticketing industry and a lot of e-commerce obviously is. Ticketing is really interesting because when fraudsters are acting in ticketing, it's most heavily weighted toward last minute, because as soon as that event happens, they know they have their money and they're free and clear. There's no product sitting out there. There's nothing can be returned or reclaimed after the event happens. And so it tends to be pretty appealing for that and other reasons.
And the payouts are usually high. Like most people's ATVs are like, in the $30 to $60 range. Ticketing is several $100s. Resale ticketing is pushing 1,000.
Often more.
So it's a big payout, and it's easy, and it's cash. So maybe it's not easy, but it's like it's lucrative if you can figure out a scheme. So
So looking at all of that, everything that we've done in the recent years has been based around machine learning, and it's a supervised machine learning platform that we've been utilizing and building on. And so looking at that, supervised means that you are actively training those machine learning models.
Yep,
right?
you put the guides on it. Yeah.
when it comes to fraud, typically the way that most e-commerce that uses supervised machine learning works, maybe near all of it, is based around the fraud chargeback, right? When down the road, maybe it's a few days later, maybe it's 30, 60, 90 days later that you get a fraud chargeback. That's the main object that trains the machine learning model what's bad. And so as a team of agents or a risk team, you're trying to also train the model of what's good so that you're not, letting everything be assumed bad, and you're training it bad. And so as we looked at it, it was like, how can we shorten that feedback loop? Because one of the downsides of machine learning, especially when it comes to event ticketing, as you know, every single day your customer base is different. Maybe tomorrow you have a Taylor Swift on sale. The next day it's a BTS, big push. The next day is Garth Brooks. Every single day it's a totally different profile of customer, totally different,
and they
browsing
travel
behavior.
Like people move for events. So like you can't do your regular calculations, there's just a lot of different factors that go into ticketing. And people, you don't see them all the time. And then all of a sudden you'll see them buy a bunch, everything that looks like that. And then not even to bring in professional resellers, which look like every other bot you've ever seen, but it's a bunch of people. It's just so many factors that go into ticketing. So it could be difficult, but that feedback loop is true because you don't get, I think the vast majority of usual chargebacks come in ticketing in about 45 days. Probably it's 75%. But the problem is your on sale happens for a couple of days and then that event's sold out. So you can get ripped right in there, and then you won't even know that you've been ripped. But one of the good things, I'll just to give away a little bit. One of the good things about event ticketing is the fraud that you see on the on sale, you have time to usually stop it unless it's been resold. But the bad thing about that is you don't see the most of your fraud on the on sale. Like you were just saying,
you see it
all of our fraud happens in the last minute ticketing window.
Yep. And again, those last minute rushes happen. And then that same buyer behavior and same pattern of browsing and et cetera doesn't happen again, right? The next day, it's a totally different last minute purchasing pattern. And last week it was NBA and next week it's NHL. And, it's totally different. And so with that, try to look at how can we shorten this feedback loop and not be reliant on the fraud chargeback. So that was one of the premise points. The other, manual review sucks.
Oh God, it does. It's so expensive.
Having to, look at one order at a time and look at, dig into that and try and figure out who this person is that's buying it. Are they real? Are they a fraudster? Are they using a stolen credit card? You're essentially, it's a slightly educated roll of the dice.
Yeah. And half the time, the people that are winding up in your manual review, they're standing outside the arena. Their four friends already went in, they're trying to buy a ticket. Then you got a manual review. If you don't get to that thing in minutes, you could ruin their whole thing. And then you're getting a charge back just on customer service alone on that. So it's so challenging. Manual review sucks in event ticketing.
Yeah. So what we came up with was this idea of every 6 hours, can we review the previous 6 hours worth of orders? And so we're looking through those previous 6 hours of orders, trying to find bad orders that were missed and got through. We're trying to find good orders that were thought to be bad and rejected so that we can train the model that this was actually good, as well as trying to identify fraud trends. If I'm, as an agent, looking at 100 orders, I can see the trends across the last 6 or 12, 24 hours in a very different way than I can if I'm looking at one order at a time.
So so you're looking at a huge data set. So they have a bunch of data on their screen, in an Excel style format. And then I used to do that.
It's a little bit nicer than an Excel format. But
do you do it inside your tool?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
So we'll start kind of with this time-based list. And then as agents are going through kind of looking for the trends, they can very easily create lists based on any trends that they're seeing. So maybe they're seeing a lot of, I don't know, we'll say Brooklyn Nets, a lot of fraud there, or potential fraud. And so they'll create a list of Nets orders from the last 24 hours so they can look through.
So they're retroactively going back.
But constrained to very recent. And using those, because then all of a sudden, okay, I see this pattern of 12 out of the last 100 orders for Nets. I can see this very clear pattern. All of the email and phone numbers are checking out fine, but there's this commonality in maybe it's the bin, or maybe it's an IP, or, something like that, that they can tie back in, or, various device details, all the different factors that are weighed. And then that data can be used to very clearly identify fraud trends and fraud rings, so that we can base our training of the model off of that.
Can you start training the model? Like if you see are you marking things as fraud in real time, and is it automatically train the model, or do you have to go back and then say every so often run a retrain on your model, or does it do it in real time?
It does it in real time.
That's excellent.
So we're constantly, like every day, and we monitor our label rates. If you're labeling too heavily on bad, then you're going to start skewing the model bad. And so we've got to have so many good labels, also so many bad labels, so that we can train the model accordingly and keep it balanced. And so moving to that kind of post-order review model has been totally game-changing for us. Our agents are happier, and it's far more exciting to work when you're like getting to look through those 100 orders and find the trends and try and piece together almost investigation style, compared to looking at one order at a time. You've got a ticking clock trying to make a decision. Is this good or bad? Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. We'll find out if we get a fraud charge back down the road. More common than not is that you're insulting a customer and you're rejecting an order because you don't know if it's good or bad.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll come to false positives in a minute. I definitely want to dive into that a little bit, but I think that that's really interesting how, like, so basically the order, they have the tickets, like technically the person would have the tickets. So you would just be retroactively like, well, canceling them if they're going through. And do you apply this like do you apply this across the whole customer base? Yeah,
we do. And so not everything at this point, we're not primary for everything. Not all resale can we reissue, but the lead that this gives us on getting ahead of fraud is so much more helpful. So if you see someone starting the orders that do get through, that it cost wise is sort of no consequence. But more than that, looking toward the future, ticketing came from a place where it was all PDF based. And once those tickets are out there, you're SOL. But we're moving to a place that the barcode is a living object, and looking toward the future, more and more and more inventory will be able to be saved and recouped against.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point. Like you don't see the PDS very much anymore. Like you just don't. And like a lot of people, like they were used to that. We used to have we're used to paper stock tickets. Then we went to PDS for like 10 years, and we were used to the PDFs. But now with like the mobile phones, like your phone is your ticket, and so we have like the revolving barcodes, like SafeTix from Ticketmaster, and then the Access, their revolving one there. It's pretty cool. But it's even going to NFC now too. So that's pretty cool, because a lot of these ticketing companies, you see a lot of internet chatter where they're like, why don't ticketing companies, it's going to revolutionize the blockchain, NFTs, blockchain. Well, a lot of these people don't realize that if they Google their favorite ticketing company or their least favorite ticketing company and the word blockchain together, you'll see over the last 10 years there has been a lot of acquisitions in that space by those companies. And a lot of those things like the revolving barcodes and stuff actually are ticketed on the blockchain by those companies. It's not an open blockchain, but it's a proprietary blockchain, and it exists. And it's been super helpful to be able to track back. So if you have if you have a primary ticket and it's being resold on your own platform, you can see the life cycle of the ticket. Yeah. Now there's the fraud thing that happens too in the ticketing industry, what I call it's more of an abusive thing. It's called ticket tumbling. It's where they try and transfer the ticket like 1,000 times to hopefully lose track of like where it's going. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but you see companies now starting to limit how many times a ticket can be transferred. And that's kind of helping with like the people's, the general public's general annoyance with resale is like, just jacking the prices up above. It's business, it is, you got to think of ticketing as inventory. There's not like an unlimited amount, so like if someone wants to pay more for that inventory, like that's, so be it, like I know it's going to piss a lot of people off, but I said that, but that's the price of that good, I think we've all learned that lately here, with the price of inflation and all of those things too. But that's, I mean, I've not to go off on a tangent there, but the false positives, I think is something that's super interesting, because that can be hard to measure. So I measure that on customer contacts, which isn't always the best, because there's a lot of customers that don't call. So how do you guys measure that?
So this is probably one of besides that move and like kind of rethinking our approach, probably one of the other things I'm most proud of is our approach to insults. A few years ago, we picked up that term from a guy named Kevin that used to work, I believe, at Facebook. Is kind of where that originated, I believe. But to me,
call them customer insults too. I'll
the
credit it to him,
idea of humanizing that and taking, a false positive is a number and a metric. That's great. But when you think about insulting a customer, there's a real person on the other end that didn't get to go to an event. And if you're, passionate about getting people to live events and getting to experience those emotional moments with friends and family and, those settings, that's a big deal. And if you screw up with a customer too many times, they're not coming back. Yeah. They're going to go somewhere else. And so really humanizing that and looking at it as insults. So what we did, again, we kind of same approach as COVID, like step back, kind of break it down, look at everything and say, how can we measure this? And so what we did, we started taking, let's say, here's 100 orders that we've rejected thinking that they're fraud. We're actually going to accept some portion of those and see if they turn into fraud chargebacks. So let's say it's 15 of those 100 orders that we decide instead of rejecting, we're actually going to accept them and let them process through.
But you have like it's strategic which ones you're going to accept, right? It's ones that you were kind of on the fence about. You're just not grabbing a random sampling, right?
No, we are grabbing a random sampling so that we can get a true idea of what our insult rate is. So when we can set the parameters, so maybe we want to run a test on higher dollar orders and see what our insult rate is there. Maybe lower, maybe last minute versus earlier out, maybe MLS versus NFL. So there's all different criteria that we can break that testing down on. But essentially, yes, accepting those orders, seeing do they turn into a fraud chargeback. And so 60 days out is when we consider by and large the fraud chargeback would have come in by that point. And so that's when we'll start using the numbers. And our insult rate was far higher than anybody ever would have guessed.
Interesting.
And I guarantee everybody listening to this that doesn't test this way, your number is way higher than you think it is. And so that then informs and gives us something that we can work against. And we know exactly how much money we're leaving on the table with those insults. And there's a tipping point, right? If you pull that insult lever back too far, then you're letting more fraud through. At any point I can stop fraud completely from, stolen credit cards
cancel everything
used, but then my insult rate is through the roof. Right. And so, and there's a real dollar number that hits the bottom line of the business that way. And so, so balancing it, but always knowing at any moment kind of what our insult rate is, what our fraud chargeback rate is, and being able to have those two levers to adjust up or down.
Super interesting. Like I've talked about it on some of my other podcasts on here, some of the episodes in the past, that like you and I both have competition in our space. So we have to be aware of our insult rate. And there's so many things like classes at MRC, at MAG, that are like, what level of friction? Actually, I saw it when we were at MAG last week. I saw on the board, somebody had put on the Walmart one, like, what is the correct level of friction? And like, that really caught me off guard that question was up there when they were talking, when it was Walmart and JP Morgan were doing that one with, actually, I think it was MasterCard was on there too. And it was so funny that like people are looking for that exact answer, but there isn't. It's your business. Like, what is like your level of friction for going to an event, and somebody's like hunger and lust to go to an event is completely different than someone trying to buy a box of protein from me, to go work out, because they can go down to the local GNC or Walmart and buy that protein if they really want to. So if I can't piss them off, like I have to be really careful. So the friction on my site has to be almost non-existent. Now, we used to in other markets do things like small charges and authorization codes, but mostly in foreign markets. Like we did a lot of business in Russia before the war, so we were able to do some things in those regions that they're more familiar with. But that sort of stuff doesn't work in North America. It's the same thing like 3D Secure, where Europe is more used to seeing 3D Secure prompts. In America, it's like, what is this? People think they're getting their banks taken over. But at some businesses where they're the only sole supplier of a product, you can put all sorts of friction in front. You could 3D secure them. You could have them solving CAPTCHAs. You could have them doing math problems, doing your homework, and they're still going to do it in order to get their item. But for you and I, like, we have those tickets, like on your site, if they're resale, they might be listed on StubHub and Vivid and everything, and you're trying to get them on to buy from you. Meanwhile, like, you can't be throwing 3 secure pops. You can't be doing like customer validations. You need to be able to authenticate your customer as quickly as possible with the most amount of accuracy without them knowing you're doing it at
Yep.
all.
Yep.
And that's just the way there is to it. And I think that you're so right. Like you need to find a way to measure your false positives. My way isn't perfect. It's better than nothing. And it's something that we are very aware of. And I've done a lot since I've been here to try and lower that, mostly around approvals. I think that I've increased our risk tolerance a little bit here just I think that people are sensitive, businesses are sensitive to fraud and fraud losses, and seeing that without context can alarm people in higher positions at their organization. But if you step back and look at the context, and you look at the approval rates, and you look at the percentages there versus what your fraud losses are, there's definitely a lot of value in increasing your approval rates up front, and declining less orders. Now, if your risk profile, so if you're selling like digital coins for the world's most popular game, it's going to be a little different than if you're selling rugs, to some, I don't know, random knitting factory over somewhere,
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
So you were able to move the needle pretty significantly on your false positives. How long did that take? Like, I mean, did it take months? Did it take years? Like, just because you said COVID, we've been in COVID forever.
So I think one of the interesting things is always being aware of insults and trying all sorts of different approaches to making agents aware and knowing every agent what their insult and fraud chargeback rate is, and knowing that at any given point. We saw some small movements, but it wasn't until our move to the post-order review process that I described that we saw massive movement in reduction of insults, to the tune of, I'll just say, tens of millions of dollars this past 12 months.
There you go.
Pretty significant. And
are you busted into the board meetings and saying, "Look at what I did"?
Not yet. We'll see. Hopefully that happens, but we'll see. Don't want to give away any surprises, but yeah, that has been a huge win for us. And that's, we're a year into this kind of post-order review approach, and still tons of optimization to happen. The other big thing, you alluded to this earlier in something you were saying, but besides being able to train the model better, and being able to reduce our insults, we now know when we're getting hit with fraud attacks, right? Previously, we didn't know until we would get, a massive amount of fraud chargeback. So cross your fingers through World Series time and playoff time and see what happens in the next month. And did we get hit or not? And now we know within a day, within 24 hours of any, increases in fraud, that we can then react and respond to, which is one of the coolest things. And so, not that there aren't some orders that we didn't find, but the goal is getting as close to 100% of fraud chargebacks, knowing about them before they come in.
So, and we'll talk about chargebacks in a second there, but I think that there's a lot to be said for a solid data dashboard, like a data forward dashboard. I see, my very first fraud provider that I ever worked with full time had a really, like, you could just see all the data that you wanted to see as far back as you want to see it in one scrollable page. So you could just be going, you could see 1,000 rows if you wanted to, and you could set your columns, do whatever you want to do. And it's just like, here's data, like, just do what you want to do. And that was like how I spent probably the first almost 5 years of my life in this industry, using that level of tool. Now I use other tools in a multi-layer approach there too, but then, I cycled through a bunch of other tools throughout my time. And some of them don't. Some of the really popular ones, like the really, 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 really popular ones, don't show data like that. Like, you have to do a data extract in order to look at it in that format. They'll show you like a queue, and then you could go in and you could click on individual orders and you could look at it, but you can't just see just a huge list of just orders in chronological order. What happened to him? Here's all the information approved, all the information approved, all the information review, all the information declined, and it's just right there. And like, you could see like those patterns, like a crossword puzzle almost. You can see like those lines coming across. And I do wish, I'm actually working with a consulting client right now, on my own, that is looking for a tool that does this. Like, that's how they do exactly what you do in a post-order review right now, but they are using a third-party tool to do it. And in order to get that list, they're not allowed to do data exports themselves. So they have to email their rep and get it. And they aren't able to get that quick enough. And when they do, often columns are missing. So like they can't get like things like an IP address, or they'll say like the last four of the credit card is gone. So they can't see, like they never get what they want. So we're trying to work with them and their provider to give them a actual dashboard that works. So whether that be creating a new tool or modifying their existing tool, we're trying to get them there. But it is really useful when you see it like that. And then I just think that so many people are used to like leaning on their tools these days. A lot of these tools, like the instant decision tools and the covered tools, are really big on making those decisions. You can lay off your whole manual review team. We'll take care of all the decisioning for you. But at the end of the day, like if you need to look at the data, you need to be able to do that if you want. And then you also need to be able to have people on your team or yourself, be able to glean the information. You and I are getting a little old to have our sleeves rolled up and be in the trenches as much as we used to. But if we need to, we still need to be able to see the data. And I have a couple of different tools that I use here, and one of them allows me to do that. And it's been super cool just to look at the data, just to see the data. And that was my long-winded rant on what it is to have layouts and data dashboards appropriately. Not just data that gives you insights, but just raw effing data. Let's talk about your chargebacks. What has happened with your chargebacks since you've taken this new approach?
We're at a pretty low level, lowest from a sustained kind of monthly view. We're at the lowest that we've been really, I'll say, in normal operating time. So exclude the time of COVID.
We all had to get certain exemptions from our from the networks for our individual mids during that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's balance. I think that's totally fair. Like I was saying, like earlier, like I was alluding to that I increased my risk tolerance. Like there's a balance. There's a balance between to be the lowest doesn't mean you're winning. And I'll say that on every panel. There is, if you have no chargebacks, you fucked up. Like I'm just gonna say it. I have the explicit tag on here, so I can.
And the interesting thing is, especially in a machine learning model like we've been talking about, you have to have fraud happen so you can train the model of what fraud looks like.
Because
I don't want to do zero or I can't beat it, right?
Exactly.
And so I've got to have some. And I know with the post-order review approach, that means there's going to be more get through at the very front, but then hopefully we're finding it within that 6 to 24 hour time frame, and being able to act on it. The big change for us has been in non-fraud chargebacks. Consumers have figured out that they can file a chargeback rather than reaching out to customer support. So it doesn't matter how great your customer support team is, how easy they are to get a hold of. We pull stats, and of our non-fraud chargeback rate, which is honestly often in the last few months, last year, been higher than our fraud chargeback rate. Normally pre-COVID, non-fraud is not really something on anybody's radar to any large extent. And now, like I said, it's often higher than our fraud chargebacks. But people know that they can, open a non-fraud chargeback and get their money back in a lot of cases.
Do you ever go, like, this is what I used, and I still do it, but most of my things are in other languages now. But the only one that gives me reliable insight into what the customer is thinking on these non-frauds is PayPal, because I can see their comments when they open the claims. So I love to go into PayPal and look at the comments of the reasons why that they're doing it. And usually it is just absurd, like absolutely absurd. Like no real consumer can really have that line of thinking and expect to just get their money back. They're just like, like in ticketing, it was like, I don't want to go anymore. It's like, that's not how this works, like, and then a lot of things like people using the wrong payment methods, or they get caught using somebody else's payment method. And they're like, I'm in trouble. I need my money back. It's like, so if you ever get a chance, go in your PayPal and look at the claims comments, because it's eye opening, the thought process that you learn from your consumers, like on that. So
that's interesting.
Non-fraud, man.
Part of it though too is looking at what your ultimate win rate is, especially with non-fraud, right? Like obviously you've got friendly fraud mixed in with fraud chargebacks, and so that's a whole thing in and of itself. But with non-fraud, hopefully there's ways to resolve those, and they weren't owed money back. Otherwise it would have been a refund in the first place. And so you've got to look at it differently, and you can't base everything on just what your opened non-fraud chargeback rate is.
I've spent a lot of time in my past with the actual networks themselves, like looking at the responses that I had sent in and said, okay, so I lost this. I thought it was a pretty good response. Like, why? And then so I've done it with almost every single one of them and sat down, like, and I'm talking like day-long working sessions, and really gleaned a lot of information, like things like for American Express, specifically on digital goods, for example, they, a lot of times, if you can't prove delivery on a non-receipt, they will just side against you. So one of the things that they suggested was you say the goods were delivered to, and then you put the email in your response. So you have the keyword is delivered, and they look for that. You know, their people are trained to look for that. So it's how you word things. And then I think like the biggest one, you know, and I think this is where a lot of businesses might go wrong, is like the less is more approach. You know, you need to be direct, because like these guys that are deciding these cases, these outcomes, like they have a queue that they're going through on their computer.
Yep.
So they want to be in and out of these cases as quick as possible. They have KPIs on their side too. So you want to get them the information as clearly and as quickly and in as few words as possible. You can have your supporting document on the other pages, but if you have like 18 pages, like they're not gonna, I think that's the limit now. They're not gonna read all 18. Like get that shit done in like 5, you know?
Yep.
Like, and highlight your terms of service. But like if you got proof of shipping or anything like that, or any sort of violation, like you need to really get to the point and get in and out of there. And I've been testing. So we have a Shopify that we use to test new products. You know, it's easy for us to bring things on, and I test the responses on there, like myself. And I've been like trying to see how few words I can get in a generic template reply that I just copy and paste and change the names on. And I would say I'm at about a 75% win rate right now, and I've got it down to, it's one single paragraph, and it is 4 sentences long. And that's all I mean, I do, like I said, the shipping label and that sort of stuff on there, but it's just one little blurb that I use in a 75% win rate. I'm pretty proud of that one.
That's pretty great. Yeah. And I mean, the way each of the issuers handle chargebacks and what they're looking for, your point about Amex is spot on, because it's totally different with every single one.
Yeah, and the compelling evidence stuff, like when you have like especially on like Visa, you know, like Visa's vary by the book, so you need to make sure that you really draw attention to like the things. I know compelling evidence is changing, it's expanding finally next year, but like right now, you know, the IP address, the email address, and the credit card, I actually would like either bold those, or if the issuer would accept color, I'd put it in bright red, so it would instantly draw the guy's attention to it. And we had a pretty good win rate, especially during COVID, though. You know, like the COVID stuff. Like, you know, was majority non-fraud. I was like, almost everything was non-fraud coming in, and that was pretty brutal there. You know, I understand what people were wanting from that, and I empathize with them, you know, but like at the end of the day, I had to do my job, and a lot of that was really working on those responses. Visa, that's like you were on some of the calls I was on. Like Visa was in MasterCard and Discover. Everybody actually was putting out very strict guidelines for ticketing and travel, because we were kind of like get lumped into the same thing, because you book it early, you pay for it early, and the usage doesn't happen for a really long time. So they had very specific things that we were doing. So there was a lot of toying with responses. But I will say, once I found the ones that worked, I automated it. It was completely automated for the majority of it, and it's a pretty good success on that, except for the second chargeback sucked too. But you know, that's a story for another day. So so what else? Like anything else you guys have been working on that you would like to share with the audience? I know we're kind of getting up on time here.
I think that's really the two biggest things would be kind of that shift to post order, the focus on insults and insult testing, and kind of wrapping those together. We really put a lot of effort into monitoring what we call throughput, which is as soon as a customer hits that checkout button, what does, you know, that whole process look like? What can go wrong? Sometimes, as you know, from ticketing, tickets aren't available by the time the transaction completes. So that's part of throughput. Sometimes that order is rejected to believe to be fraud. So that's part of what can happen there. Sometimes an error occurs, you know, like product level ticket over limit, you know,
we're not perfect even on our technology,
kinds of things like that can happen. And so really monitoring that throughput, and you know, of the 100,000 people that clicked checkout in this time period, what's our net? How many actually got through when we deduplicate that? Because some people will try 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 times. And so when you dedupe that, what is your dedupe throughput rate? so that you're again kind of anytime that you cannot get lost in the forest for the trees. That's always, I think, a good way to look at it is, yes, we want to drill down and see the specifics, but then we want to be able to see how this carries back out and look at it from a big picture.
So I think that's excellent. Like this was an excellent conversation about a different way than some of us do our individual businesses. Like I think that there's been, and I'm guilty of it too, talking about we need to get our fraud decisioning up earlier. But I think to your point, you're a great example of what happens if you do that and it doesn't work out properly for the business. Like, so it's another example of your mileage may vary based on how your fraud approach. So yours being in a more post-auth style thing has worked out greatly for your business. And I think it's important for people to still be able to look at that and make sure, like you could block everybody the second they log in. You're like, that's fraud, I know it. But there's going to be false positives in there. And depending on the sensitivity of that to your business, like your approach is a great example of another way to do things that is extremely effective. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I ask everybody, what are the top 3 trends in their world? It doesn't have to necessarily be your business. It could just be the things that you're aware of. What are the top 3 trends happening in your world to wrap this one up?
We're still, as has been the case for a long time, but really increasing, seeing ATO. That's definitely a big
Thank
thing.
you. That is on the rise again. I know Carice just did an excellent podcast, I think came out this morning on that, and another phrase on that one. So go check that one out, everybody. That's really good. ATO's still on the rise. Don't turn your back on that.
And interestingly, a few years ago, at least for us, the ATO didn't have a dollar impact. And so it was a little bit kind of puzzling, and it was a lot of testing. And now we're starting to see a lot of, looking for tickets and accounts that can be sold or transferred out. Looking for accounts that are in existence so that they're going to be purchases, more likely to get through fraud filters, that kind of thing. And so starting to see a lot of that. Let's see. The non-fraud chargebacks is still a huge thing. I mentioned that and we talked about that. And then it's impacting us a little bit differently, but refund fraud. And the same, I never got my tickets. Well, being able to look through emails and like, you opened it, so you did, but also there's a lot of, one of the approaches that a number of ticketing companies have taken are these like very proprietary, try to lock people into a system that takes away the ability to be able to see what happened and service that, but also makes it a real pain in the ass for consumers sometimes.
That's a great point.
You buy your ticket on Seat Geek and now you've got to log into this other system somewhere else and try to get through, and it's not fan friendly at all. And then when something goes wrong, we have a great customer support team and like pride ourselves on how quick you can get a hold of someone.
But you're still gonna have to tell them to call somebody else.
And when our hands are tied and there's not much we can do there. So that ties into those same kind of approaches and metrics and things that can be taken advantage of, and getting then into, I guess, the last, maybe a broader way to say it would be policy abuse.
Yes, sir.
So
that is
whole can of worms there, but
that's a whole that's a big thing. I did that episode, my last episode with Al from Riskified. I'm actually going to Seattle to talk policy abuse with Tom Donnelly at a Riskified panel up there next month in October 19th. You can register online, everybody. So I'm happy to see that policy abuse is really starting to come out, because I've been screaming about that since probably the latter part of like the hierarchy of COVID. And it's coming, but I mean that still ties into your non-frauds and all of that, because there's a lot of noise in there, people expecting, and like I keep saying, on every single one of these, that's bigger losses than your chargeback losses are. So keep an eye on that. Totally. Well, thank you very much for being generous with your time today. This was another excellent episode. Thank you for bringing proper audio equipment, because it sounds fantastic. No, everybody else has been on here. Like, I'm not knocking you guys. Everybody sounds fantastic. I'm just saying this is mega clear right here. So thanks again. Anytime you ever want to come back, if you got any new things you ever want to debut, go ahead and give me a call. But it's just been an absolute pleasure having you on here.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thanks, Jordan.
All right. Thank you.